Shinsekai Yori is a brilliant piece of fiction. It creates a fascinating world for the audience to explore, a world that's shrouded in many layers of mystery. As the threads unravel, we learn more about the dark truths hidden away. The questions it asks its audience through its plot and reveals are important pieces for it all to come together at the end for one final big reveal. The ending of the show is special to me. Not only because of how sickening or haunting it was in the moment, but also because of how much it enhances the rest of its story and its messages. Throughout its runtime, it makes statements about humanity and human nature that become key factors in landing every reveal, and I wanted to take the time to explore exactly what it wants to tell us. Human nature is such a complex concept. There's no real way to put a finger on exactly what that embodies, good or bad, and yet the show does such a phenomenal job at displaying various instances where the decisions made actually feel so human. Where you could tell how some level of human greed or love or selfishness or righteousness comes into play and creates some level of detail in the show. All these little details being sprinkled in enrich the world and sets the stage for the plot and story to deliver, and I think it's something I appreciate so deeply about it all. It begins its exploration though with a single piece to the puzzle: Cantus. Cantus is such an interesting concept in the story of Shinsekai Yori. It's a magic that has the potency and versatility to set up for some of the most important conversations and reveals in the show. It's strong enough to be used as a tool that could kill someone else without much effort, and it's versatile enough that it can completely affect the way humans interact with the world. Having a part of a population that has this magic while the other part of the population doesn't sets up for a clear divide in society. Power held over others leads humans to corruption. This is one of the points the show attempts to make, and I think it succeeds at it. It argues that many of the reasons the world followed its trajectory throughout their history and the reason the current society exists is because Cantus became a source of a power dynamic. A power dynamic breeds feelings of superiority in humans by feeding people's egos. This isn't a revelation or anything because it's evident even in our own society. Whether it's a boss acting like a dick to his employees or whether it's in a marriage. Not that these are the only examples either. Power dynamics exist everywhere, and the fact that there is even a power imbalance can perceivably cause contempt and leads to increasingly exploitative behaviors. The bigger the imbalance, the more true this is. The less someone with power has to care about the consequences to them, the more selfishly they can act. With the case of Cantus being such a strong tool, it manifests as an equally strong source of corruption. Whether that's the first humans that murdered everyone and threw the world into chaos, or whether it's the emperor that used his authority and status to force his subjects to clap for 3 days and 3 nights or else they'd die. As more and more humans started getting Cantus, they had to care less about the others and created a world that suited them the most, and anyone without Cantus ended up being oppressed under them. This dynamic carries forward to present day in the story where it's the humans in the villages oppressing the Queerats by using them. The humans have now very clearly believed that they are a superior race to the Queerats, and it's only after the story ends we learn how ironic this is. What I really appreciated here was how the story actually leaned into the corruption metaphor. This happened in the first Queerat arc, and it's one of those blink and you miss it kind of moments the first time you watch the show, but on a rewatch though, oh boy. It happens when the members of Group 1 find themselves stripped of their powers and Saki and Satoru end up in Squealer's colony. Upon regaining his powers, Satoru is very clearly a different person. He loses his calm and gets drunk on his powers. The feeling of being powerful is so fun to him that he stops caring about restraint and safety and instead uses his powers to win the war for Squealer's colony. Logically speaking, there was no reason for Satoru to help Squealer here. He should have prioritized Saki's safety and tried to find the others in his group. It was simply a display of strength, a fulfillment of his ego that led him to take his actions, and that's the purpose served by Cantus, a tool that fulfills humans' selfish need to be superior to others. What's impressive to me in all of this isn't just the understanding of power dynamics or selfishness. It's the usage of the concepts in a post-apocalyptic world and how it makes so much sense in their own world. It's extremely believable that humans would act this way to one another and there would be such a divide in society, and that's what I like so much about the approach to Cantus. The versatility of Cantus was quite impressive too. Its ability to affect animals around the villages and its ability to modify DNA became important points to set up for the Queerat reveal at the end. Just thought I'd mention that because it certainly did make it feel that little bit more interesting. It shows how much thought went into making Cantus this tool that both serve the story practically and metaphorically, and how that in itself shows its understanding of humanity overall. Going back to the problem of power though, this power dynamic and its corruption was something the scientist branch of the human population realized they had to deal with. The solution they came up with, however, posed its own interesting moral questions. There is a strong theme of control present in the setup of the villages. It's clear from the get-go that humans in this society were far less free than you would expect them to be. Whether this was small instances of control where the village sets a curfew on children and tells children not to interact with Queerats, or, well, slightly bigger instances where problematic children were simply removed from their society. Control was the name of the game, and only slowly do we learn how messed up and complex it all really is. I think what worked for the story here was how the information was given to the audience. By having the story centered around our main character Watanabe Saki, it shows us the problematic nature of their society first and foremost, and then slowly but surely reveals why all of this was so necessary. And of course, this was due to fiends and karma demons. This setup for their society asks the audience an important question. How much control is too much? We see the children in this story getting treated as far less than humans, and well, even if there is an understanding that this is to prevent the slightest chance of them becoming fiends or karma demons, it still doesn't exactly feel good to see. The fact that any child in the villages could essentially not be treated as a human life until they hit the age of 17 is far too controlling and inhumane, and that's the uncomfortable feeling this anime leaves you with. There is also the argument of the perceived effectiveness of the method too. There is no guarantee that all or even any of the children that have been dealt with as a part of the regime would have even gone on and become fiends or karma demons. It balances this aspect of the discussion though with the simple fact that no fiends or karma demons have appeared in the last hundreds of years. It tells the audience a simple fact about the effectiveness of the program and asks us to come to our own value judgment of the situation. Maria's speech at the start of episode 16 was important because it showed someone that was a victim of the system and what they ended up having to deal with. How being shunned from their home for simply not wanting to bend to the rules creates a situation that's so unfair for the victim. And listen, it's easy to sit here and say, oh, of course, children getting dehumanized and killed for almost no reason is bad, but it's not like the story or the plot argues against this point. It's simply what reality looks like. Through the countless decisions of the past, this is the system the humans have now decided works, and it argues that it's still a better compromise than what existed before it. That fact right there is actually quite an important distinction. The system itself isn't inherently evil. In fact, it's the opposite in some ways. The system exists as the absolute best effort of humankind at making sure the largest majority of the population survives. As much as the approach taken is naive, it definitely shows a very human intention of wanting safety and security for the majority of the people. They don't want to kill their children, it's just something they must do, and it sucks. As long as the threat of fiends and karma demons exists and there isn't a viable solution that is better, this system will continue to exist as some version of itself. I would go one step further here and say that being deeply paranoid about existential threats is deeply human as an emotion, and the fact that the system exists is simply a testament to this, despite how good or bad the system is, but it's not necessarily a hill that I'm willing to die on. All in all, with regards to their society, this is an extremely interesting take on how humanity would come to a solution to a problem of power were it to ever exist in our future. Especially since it even showed us what their history looked like, it's all the more believable that humans with that situation could perceivably end up in the same situation. And that's what I find so impressive about it. Beyond the question of control though, there is a very important question of humanity that it asks through its plot. Beyond the children and the filtering though, the adults in the village have lived a completely false life. Their memories were either removed or altered to the point where they wouldn't lose their own minds, and anyone deemed slightly problematic was just removed from the system completely. If a human is a product of their experiences, then the people in the villages were also ultimately exactly that. Incomplete. I think it's hard to realize this fact because most of the adults we're shown are in some way in the loop of all the stuff going on. The average adult in the village probably doesn't know all that much, and their modeling of their personality and experiences meant that they were lacking key features to even be considered a human. As if that wasn't bad enough though, they had another issue. An over-reliance on Cantus. It was the very reasonable belief that as long as the humans had Cantus, they would be the strongest species on the planet. Cantus being as powerful and versatile as it is made a lot of other tools and tactics obsolete in comparison. Combine this with the fact that the humans had no threat to their survival from the outside world, it pacified their race and halted their progress. If they were suddenly unable to use their Cantus though, they were most certainly weaker than they should have been by human standards. The show makes it a very strong point to show that the Queerats, even without Maria's daughter, had wartime tactics and strategies that were far more advanced than the humans in the villages. Where the humans having Cantus didn't even really matter, and it was obvious just how effective these tactics really were. The very deliberate selection of non-problematic individuals on top of their systematic over-reliance on Cantus made for a weaker society. Weaker humans that had no choice but to cower in fear when getting attacked and wait for someone to come and help them. This is addressed as the whole point of the Group 1 experiment was to create individuals who understand how the world works better so they could help protect the villagers. In the end, it was due to Group 1 and their tenacity and ingenuity that the humans managed to deal with the Queerat revolution at all. Which then begs the question, what kind of human was even living in the villages? Could these people even be called humans? If the argument the show is making is that Group 1 only had the capacity to deal with the Queerat threat because they had their memories and lived a relatively normal human life, then could the people in the villages even be considered human? The argument of course goes both ways. As much as it argues that the humans in the villages are not very human, it also makes a strong case for Queerats actually being more human in some of their own ways. The Queerats not having access to Cantus, being fellow humans in some ways as we know, meant that they adapted far better to surviving the dangerous world of Shinsekai Yori. They're tribal, crafty, and resourceful. Some specimens like Squealer and Kiromaru were even shown to be adept enough to understand the nuances of war and their relationship with the humans. There is a scene near the end of the anime where Kiromaru is talking to Saki and Satoru about how Queerats always try to make the best of their situations. And that was an extremely important showing in how the Queerats embody the human spirit. Even if the average Queerat was not as smart as the average human, there was a strong case to be made that their human-like qualities and spirit are what made the Queerat revolution possible in the first place. They didn't have altered memories or any crutches to make them complacent, they adapted and survived in the world no matter what, and as a result, led what could be considered a more human life. There is, however, a stronger case for humanity in the Queerats, and that lies with one very special character. Squealer. Squealer is the embodiment of what it means to be human. Whether that's his cunning that lets him manipulate both humans and Queerats alike, or whether that's his ambition that gets him sick of the hierarchy present in his colony and, following that, the wider society. Squealer's intellect is clear to us every time he's on screen. He uses every single resource he's provided in the story to gain whatever advantage, big or small. He is a fantastic general, but more importantly, he's a tyrant. Someone capable of leading the masses and finding a way to victory no matter the cost. It's Squealer's general demeanor of not wanting to be inferior to the humans and his cunning that embody his human spirit. Without Squealer, it's still obvious that most Queerats hated their place in the hierarchy, but would they ever be bold enough to revolt against the humans? Not really. I know this is essentially me saying that because Squealer was ruthless and cunning that he was human, which, I mean, yeah, kinda. But no, seriously, Squealer is many things. He is intelligent, resourceful, and he's also ruthless and cunning. He is the sole Queerat responsible for inciting a revolution. I mean, that in itself is a great claim to his humanity, but even on top of all of that, his speech at the end of the anime was such a beautiful showcase of his feelings. Not only because his words came from a place of being a victim of the system, but because I could envision a human saying those exact words. It was a convincing display of humanity and it was beautiful for me to watch. In reality, the only reason he even lost the war was because of Saki's gambit, so who could actually say what could have been had Squealer succeeded in winning the war?
私たちは獣でも奴隷でもない。
獣でないとしたらお前は何なのです。
私たちは人間だ。
The war and the conclusion of the story leaves an important question. Which side was more human? If this was the basis of the war starting, then I believe both sides had good enough ground to stand on for their own humanity. The answer, however, for the sake of the story, was the side that won in the end. It doesn't exactly close the argument in a satisfying enough way to put a pin on the debate. One side simply tried proving themselves as the real humans and failed. That doesn't necessarily take away from their humanity or prove that they were wrong, they just lost. I think it's worth mentioning that if the Queerats had found themselves as the victors of the war, they would simply do to the current humans what was being done to them. And perhaps in that future, another revolution would occur from the other side. It's such an interesting take on the conflict because even as much as Squealer says that he wanted to be treated as an equal by humans, or how that was the reason the war started, it is yet again so human to take your victory and run all the way with it. That isn't me saying that their treatment in the show is fair, but what's important here is to come to a reasonable compromise that breaks the cycle. The ending reveal changed a lot about how I saw this humanity conflict, and I definitely don't need to tell anyone how good of a reveal it really was, but I do want to say that the reveal opened up the room to so many of these interesting concepts like the humanity of the characters present, and it's something that enriches the experience in hindsight. With the ending though, it leaves the audience at a point that got me to think about the future. With the resolution to the plot, it did feel like I was left with more questions than answers. What is to be done from here? Now that Saki and Satoru have learned the truths of the world and the Queerats, what should they do from here? Is there really a better solution ahead to the problem of Cantus that still treats the human and Queerat population as properly as it's supposed to? I think there's a real question to be asked here on whether or not this information should even be given to the general public, since it was hidden deep enough to barely be found by Satoru. Would the people be able to handle this disturbing reality? No matter what I think, what's important here to me is the hope that this revolution will get treated differently. That knowing the Queerats are essentially humans essentially gives someone like Saki and Satoru a moral responsibility to break the ever-repeating cycle of Queerat oppression, and for them to strive for a peaceful solution. You could say that it's even worse because the Queerats were humans all along, but I think that kind of invalidates the severity of the issue, because even if that truth wasn't present, there should still be no change to the approach taken. I love the feeling this ending gave me. It's the feeling of being completely engrossed in the world it's showing me and then rewarding me for thinking about it and its various nuances. An ending that doesn't just make me sick to my stomach at what I've been given so far, it also makes me want more of it. It's a brilliant display of human nature and what kind of society that builds. A very thoughtful approach to a post-apocalyptic civilization that could exist sometime in the future that resonated with me so deeply because of how much thought clearly went into making it. In just 25 episodes, I feel extremely familiar with their world and their issues, and honestly, I think that's an indication of the quality of the product. Combine that with a plot that's equal parts engaging and exciting, it is a thorough exploration of all its ideas to a point where I as an audience member am thankful for the experience. This anime and its take on humanity is quite frankly one of the best I've ever seen, and I sincerely hope those feelings of appreciation came through in this video. I hope this was a fun and interesting watch for anyone that made it this far. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.